Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Find Your Peak Fitness podcast. I'm your host, as always, Megan Wierenski, and today I'm going to talk about a very popular topic in the fitness world, and that is how do you lose that stubborn belly fat, that little pouch that we always seem to have. How do we get rid of it? I'm going to tell you everything you need to know on how you need to reduce that stubborn belly fat in regard to training, nutrition, and everything in between. And it can be rather frustrating. You could be losing weight everywhere else, your face, your arms, your legs, but the belly seems to hang on for dear life. And that leaves people thinking they're doing something wrong. And they can jump from program to program, try different diets, detoxes, whatever the case may be. But here's the truth. Belly fat is stubborn for biological reasons. And today I'm going to hopefully break down exactly why it happens and what actually works to lose the stubborn belly fat. So with that being said, let's talk about why it is so stubborn. So first we need to understand something very, very important, and that is that there's two types of fat, and there's two types of belly fat. So you've got your subcutaneous fat, which is the pinchable fat under your skin. Okay, so when you grab your stomach, your subcutaneous fat, that's what that is when you pinch it. And then you've got your visceral fat, and that is your fat stored around your organs. Now, visceral fat is actually the more dangerous type because it releases inflammatory chemicals that increase the risk for conditions like heart disease and diabetes. Now, here's why belly fat is harder to lose. Your hormones. Hormones like insulin and cortisol play a big role in fat storage. When insulin is elevated frequently, and this can be from high sugar intake or constant snacking, the body stores more fat in the midsection. Okay, it's got to go somewhere, and typically that goes into the abdomen. Chronic stress also plays a role, so that raises cortisol levels as your stress hormone, which signals to your body to store more fat around your midsection. Now let's talk about stress and lifestyle. So long-term stress, poor sleep, and pretty sedentary behavior are all linked to increased belly fat accumulation. So if you think of office workers that all they do is work like 12-hour shifts in highly strenuous jobs, as in it's mentally demanding, they've got a lot of stress put on them in terms of what they're doing within that job, their duties, but they're not moving around much. Typically the diets aren't that great, there's low activity levels, high stress. They have typically a bigger gut, okay? Another thing is genetics, and this is kind of unfortunate. Some people are simply just predisposed to store more fat in their midsection. However, stress and lifestyle and hormones, if these are all not in sync, then it makes these people that have the genetics that are predisposed to have fat around their midsection, it elevates all of this. Okay, so genetics isn't an excuse. People that do have genetics where they do store more fat around their midsection, it means that they may lose fat everywhere else first, while your stomach is the last place to change. This is very common in males, as males typically store fat in their gut. Females, we tend to store it more in our reproductive system, so that's our hips, glutes, thighs, and our lower abdomen. Now, let's clear up one of the biggest myths I hear when people ask me, they want to tighten up their tummy, they're going on holiday, or they want to, get a six-pack this year. That's their goal for 2026. So let's clear something up. You cannot spot reduced fat. So what this means, doing crunches will strengthen your abs, but they will not specifically burn fat around your core, okay? Fat loss happens systematically across the entire body. So if you ever see a workout that is like belly fat burners or something like that, it doesn't actually burn belly fat when you do that workout. It strengthens your core. Okay, the goal is to lose overall fat while maintaining muscle. Okay, and to do that you need to be in a slight calorie deficit. But when we're in a deficit, we cannot target how that fat cells reduce. So no matter how many crunches you do, if your diet is poor, or if you're in a calorie surplus, or if you're not in a calorie deficit, that's probably easier to understand, you will not lose fat. People who have abs have lower body fat percentages. Have you ever seen someone with a six-pack but fat everywhere else? No, because it's not possible. To get a six-pack, you have to be very, very lean. And these people they're not doing crunches all day. A six-pack truly is made in the kitchen. In order to have visible abs, it's a combination of low body fat percentage with moderate to high muscle mass, specifically in the abdomen. Everyone does have abs. Just most of us, it is surrounded by a layer of fat, some more than others. The more muscle you have, the more there is to push through the fat layers. And the less fat you have, the less layers there are for the muscle to show. Okay? So ultimately it's a combination of both. It's not solely one thing or the other. So doing 100 crunches a day for the rest of the year is not going to get you abs, but also just being in a calorie deficit for too long is also not going to get you abs. You need to be in a combination of both. So you need to train your core, but you also need to be in a small calorie deficit and have a low body fat percentage to have visible abs. What this body fat percentage is, it depends on the person. It depends on what your muscle mass is like, and also, like I said, people lean out in different areas. Women, we tend to lean out more in other areas compared to men. With men, the last place they lean out is typically their abdomen. So what your body fat percentage needs to get to is different from person to person. Typically, guys, it's single digits, and for females, it's possibly maybe creeping into the single digits or being more into that like 10 to 13% range. But ultimately, it's, like I said, it's a combination of both. You don't starve yourself to get lean, and you don't do thousands of crunches in an attempt to get a six-pack. You need to train hard and eat well over a period of time. So what does actually work? So I'm going to give you 5 things that consistently reduce belly fat. Okay. The first thing is strength training. Okay, so it's lifting weights. Muscle increases metabolic rate and improves insulin sensitivity. So strength training 3 to 4 days per week is one of the most powerful tools for fat loss. Now, like I said, don't go into the gym thinking, okay, I'm going to get a six-pack, I'm going to do 1,000 crunches today. You've got to be on a strength training plan where you're strength training pretty much every single part of your body. So having a system in place, and you're not just going into the gym mindlessly in an attempt to get a six-pack. So the biggest thing is to be on a plan. The next thing is your protein intake. So protein helps preserve the muscle. It regulates appetite and also stabilizes your blood sugar. So go back to that insulin sensitivity. I recommend to aim for between 0.7 to 1 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Now, if you are new to the whole fitness process on how to lose fat and gain muscle, I recommend tracking your food. So tracking your macros, things like your carbs, your fats, and your proteins, seeing what you're currently consuming, and then aim for small increases over time and adjust as needed. But if you're strength training and you're wanting to preserve that muscle, definitely aim for that 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. If you're in a deficit, I recommend actually consuming a little bit more than that. At the end of the day, calorie balance is what matters. So no matter what diet you follow, fat loss ultimately requires a calorie deficit. However, extreme dieting can increase stress hormones and slow your progress down. So that famous plateau or the famous 1200 calorie diet, that's not going to get you a six-pack. You have to be in a consistent small calorie deficit. And I've said this before, consistency beats restriction every single time. So you should never feel overly restricted with things. You do want to have some sort of boundaries. An analogy I like to use with my clients is almost think of your diet and your tracking as like you're in a bowling lane with the barriers up. So you've got a bit of flexibility, but you're never going to just go totally off the rails and like roll down the sides. You're going to be within that range, okay? But being consistent over perfection, over perfect, or restrictive is always going to win. The second to last thing is sleep. Now this is linked to stress as well, but getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep supports fat loss by regulating hunger hormones and your metabolism. When you have poor sleep consistently over time, this affects your hormones and your stress levels. It increases cravings, which ultimately will reduce the amount of food you're probably consuming and increase the belly fat storage. In relation to that, and the last point is stress management. So if your cortisol is high, constantly elevated, fat loss becomes much, much, much harder. Trust me, speaking from experience. Some simple strategies to help with stress management is walking, being outdoors, breath work, meditation, limiting your caffeine, and having a structured routine. Okay, now these are just quick tips I'm getting. This episode is not about stress management. However, that is on my radar to do something on that in the near future. But these things can help just reduce that stress. Okay, stress is one of the biggest things that I see with my clients that hinder the progress. You know, they could be doing everything right, training hard, eating correctly, but when their stress is out of whack and they're not sleeping great, their progress absolutely slows down. And like I said, speaking from experience, it's very difficult. Sometimes you don't need to change anything, just reducing that stress, and all of a sudden the weight starts dropping off again. It's so underrated, but there'll be an episode of that in the future. Okay, moving on. Why is belly fat the last thing to go? So one thing I tell my clients all the time is belly fat is usually the last place fat leaves. And it's not failure, it's physiology. Okay, your body tends to hold fat around the abdomen as an energy reserve, which is why it's often the final place to lean out. Have you ever seen people that are totally ripped, or people that are stepping up on stage in bodybuilding contests and they're so lean, but their energy is so low? And that's because it's unsustainable. Okay, we store fat as energy, and we need fat. Fat is not a bad thing. That's why it's not sustainable to live a really low body fat percentage, okay? However, that doesn't mean you can achieve a low body fat percentage, but it's at a point where you feel lean, you feel strong, but you're not diminishing in like your energy. What that looks like varies from person to person. However, if you are someone who's already lean, but you have a pouch that you want to reduce, I am afraid there's only one solution, and you need to just get leaner. But then you need to think about the trade-off, okay? The trade-off is you may feel low energy, and you need to ask yourself, is this something I can sustain for the rest of my life? So you got to find that right balance. But eventually, like I said, when you start to lean out, if you're still finding you have that pouch you want to lose, you just got to get leaner. The fat will have to be pulled from somewhere. Just remember that there's trade-offs for everything, and sacrificing your energy levels for a six-pack may not be worth it. So just find that sweet spot where you feel good, you feel lean, but you've still got that energy to maintain and sustain your life. Okay, moving on to the last segment, and that is mindset shifts. So this is the biggest mistakes I see people when they make when they're trying to lose belly fat. And this is actually across the board, regardless of what people's goals are, but people just get impatient. And I get it. I've been there. I am not the most patient person with certain things. However, I have a deep appreciation for learning how to change your physique and the time it takes to do that. And that's something I try to teach my clients too. But I see all too often people just get impatient with the process and they try to rush it. They may try things like detoxes, extreme dieting, fat burners, and these endless ab workouts. But the truth is so simple. And this is a very short segment. To build muscle, you need to eat enough protein, you need to manage your stress, you need to sleep well, and most of all, you need to be consistent. If you do these things for long enough, the belly fat will fall off, okay? You don't need to be jumping from program to program. You need to stay consistent, focus on the process, trust the process, or trust your coach or whoever you're working with. And if you do it for long enough, results will follow. I always tell people that, we're dealing with a human body, and anything rushed or anything quick tends to not have good results or long-lasting results. If you think of those who have lost weight very, very quickly, most of it is from muscle, which is not a good thing. If we gain too quickly, we gain fat. Okay, so you've got to find that sweet spot and have respect for the human body and focus on the process rather than jumping from one thing to the next and forcing results. You want to work with your body, not against it. So if you feel like your belly fat isn't going anywhere, just remember this. It's not stubborn because you're failing. It's stubborn because your body is doing exactly what it's designed to do. With the right habits and enough time, you can absolutely change that. For those of you who do not know, I also do online coaching as well as my in-person training where I coach people on these exact strategies and help them reach their goals, whether that's losing their pouch or firming up their butt or getting better at their golf. My goal is not only to get you results, but also coach you through the entire process so you can learn, possibly inspire those around you, and also have results that last a lifetime. Okay, so if you are interested, I'll link my Instagram in the show notes and you can reach out to me there. There's an application form there as well. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up the episode there. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out. If you have any ideas on topics or episodes you want me to cover, then again, just reach out. I've linked my Instagram in the show notes, so just send me a message on there. Anyway, please like, subscribe, share, and I will see you guys next week.